first song tonight will be This World Is Not My Home, first and last verses. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drift back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
Would you bow your heads? Father in heaven, we're so grateful that you loved us so much. You sent your son Jesus to die for us, that we through his shed blood can experience and enjoy eternity with you and with him and with all the other saints that are there before us. Father, we thank you for the nice opportunity to come and to have your word presented, to sing songs and to fellowship and strengthen our bonds of friendship and love midweek, so that we can enjoy the next few days and just get us through to the first day of the week again, and let's do it all again. Father, we're so grateful that we had the 3 young candidates that came to try out for the Youth and Family Minister. Help us to consider them individually and collectively, and to make the best decision for the congregation here, and to get the extra help that we need for our youth and family program, and to build a stronger congregation, a stronger family, and a better workforce in this community, to strengthen your will, your word, and to get the word out to our communities, and to help grow our kids in a way that they will not fall away when they leave home. Father, be with us tonight. Help us to kind of put aside the cares of the world, and to pay attention at hand, and that's to listen and to participate, and to with open heart and with open mind. But above all, Father, help us to do so in a manner that is pleasing in your sight. Go with us now, Father. Help us to fully engage and be engaging, and above all, Father, help us to worship you in a manner that's pleasing in your sight. Forgive us of our sins, I pray, in your Son's precious and holy name. Amen.
Our last song will be I'll Fly Away, first and last verses. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away, fly away, fly away, to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away, fly away, fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away, fly away, fly away. Just a few more weary days, and then I'll fly away, fly away, fly away, to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away, fly away, fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away, fly away.
Good evening. Good to see all of you here tonight. We're going to have a few announcements, and then you're dismissed to go to your classes. Prayers for all of those who are struggling with flu, COVID, allergies, sinus infections, and upper respiratory infections. That would include Deb Atkins and family, Gwen Wilson, Travis Autry, Ann Sauls, Juanita Smith, Rhonda LeDuc, Oz Osborne, Margie Smith. If they're not here, if they aren't here, I don't know what this means. I was reading it. All right, if they're not here, they're sick. I can go with that one. Kathy Joe's daughter, Amanda, thank you for all the prayers for her glaucoma. Tana McLaughlin is also home with pneumonia. We found that out today. Michael LeDuc's surgery is back on for the 18th. They are at the Mayo Clinic for testing this week. I think Rhonda's feeling a little bit better, but she's still under the weather. And so pray for him and for her as well. Dana and Brian Sweet's son, Sean, had a stroke on Monday. He is slowly getting better, and he might be able to go home this Friday. He went home today. All right. The Mount Dora Change Can Drive for children, Change for Children cans were collected and counted, and we donated $1,266 for the children. So thank all of you who participated in that Change Can Drive. Camp Wiregrass Family Camp is this weekend, so if you are signed up to go to that, don't forget. Bobby Andujar has a wheelchair that she no longer needs. It's free to anyone that can use it, but not to resell. Use it. Classic Crew is the 18th. Soup and salad is the menu, and so be sure there's a sign-up sheet in the foyer on the bulletin board. Due to so many of our folks, and particularly our ladies, being ill lately, the Ladies' Day brunch has been rescheduled to the 7th of March, March the 7th. We have envelopes on the table in the foyer that are for elder suggestions. That's not like old people suggestions. That's shepherd elders' suggestions. So if you have a suggestion for the elders, the envelopes are on the table in the foyer. If you have something to relay to us, put a note in the envelope. You got to sign it. Unsigned will not be considered. Sign it and drop it in the contribution plate on Sunday morning, or you can hand it to one of the elders. Please check out the slides in the bulletin board for upcoming events. You are dismissed to go to your classes.
Front row seat tonight, Adam. All right, we are, Kathy Joe, I've got them. I know you were looking for them. We're continuing our series on stress busters, and I've got outlines here. If anyone would like one to fill out, you can just come grab one here. Here,
Adam's going to pass them out.
you've been drafted. Voluntold, there you go. All right. While those are being passed out, you can see from the screen that this is going to be a two-part lesson. We're going to start it tonight, and then we'll hopefully finish it up next week. Talking about stress from loss. We've been talking about stress from lots of various different things in this class. Last week we talked about stress from conflict. We've talked about stress from work. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. So tonight we're going to be talking about stress from loss. How many of you have ever attended a seminar or classes on dealing with grief and loss? Anybody? Okay, a few hands up. Okay, so some of what we'll talk about tonight will be probably familiar to you. Some of you, if you've ever done any reading or studying on dealing with grief and loss, you'll probably recognize a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about this evening. But when we discuss loss, the first thing we want to do is to define it. Okay? And so the definition we're going to talk about tonight goes beyond just the loss of a loved one in death. And that's probably the first thing that we think about when we think about loss. What are some other ways, though, that we can experience loss? Okay, empty nest. When your kids are all gone. Some of y'all celebrate that. How else do we experience loss?
Loss of a job.
Okay, loss of a job. What'd you say, Becky? Okay, a home. Anybody ever had a home get burned or destroyed in a hurricane, a tornado? Okay. Or just having to move away from it? Okay. All right. Kelly?
It also can be loss of someone who is important to you, but they're not dead. They're just not around.
Okay.
And it's estranged. Thank you. Yeah, they're estranged, and that can be a really difficult one because they're there, but they're not there.
Okay.
So it feels like a loss.
Yeah. An estrangement can be a loss. Divorce is a loss, is it not? Yes. You know? Yeah. Job loss. I'm glad you brought that up, Becky. Alzheimer's and dementia could be classified as a loss because, and I went through this with my grandmother, you lose that person, even though they're not, she eventually died. She became a different person. That disease took her mind and turned her into somebody that she was completely not. And we were grieving her before she ever died because the woman that we knew for all those years was gone. And so that's another way you can experience loss. What about, go ahead, Becca.
I had a coworker lost his arm.
Okay.
While that's not the same as all of these, it's
Right.
still a loss.
Yeah, losing a limb, losing an arm or a leg, it is a loss because you lose some freedom there. You lose some ability of things you used to be able to do. And certainly people can cope with that, but it is definitely a loss. What about your loss of health? A lot of us are experiencing that, especially as we age. We've talked about it before. We can't do the things we used to do, and we're never going to be able to do those things again, So that can be a loss as well.
So for the ladies, I know in doing marriage counseling through the years that security is very important to the ladies, and if there's a loss of security in some shape, form, or fashion, that's a big hit to them. At least that's been my experience in dealing with folks through the years.
In the military, losing your current position is like PCS and sort of duty station.
Mm-hmm.
You've lost that comfort that you've had for how long you've ever been there.
Yep.
And now you've got to go somewhere new. And
Yeah. Yep. So what Frank says, especially like when you're in the military and you get PCS and you losing that home and that those relationships you had in that place, and now you're having to go somewhere else. And that's a cycle. especially for the lifetimers. You know, that's something you're going to continue to experience over and over and over again. And each time you have to deal with that sense of loss.
There's one that Mike Mazzalongo mentioned in his notes that I thought was interesting. He said the loss of idealism. And I thought about that for a while. And I know that I felt loss, that type of loss, when I was younger. You know, I had a very idealistic view of the world and even of the church. And then as you get older and you have experiences with fellow Christians, that sometimes that loss of idealism people have lost their faith over that, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right, so dealing with the stress caused by loss, because whenever you experience loss, of anything that we've talked about tonight, there's pain, there's grief, right? And then there's stress that comes with those. And so we've been talking about stress and how to deal with that, okay? And what are some of the feelings that we experience when we go through grief and loss? Anger. Loneliness. Heartbreak. Okay. I'm just going to read some of here. Despair, bewilderment, anxiety, fear, guilt, worry, depression, hopelessness. Okay? These are all the emotions that come along with loss and grief. So in dealing with the stress that's generated by these things and by the loss, we need to understand the grief cycle, okay? And have a strategy that helps us find some answers to comfort us in our lives. All right? And so that's what we want to spend most of the rest of our time on tonight. All right? Any kind of loss produces grief. And then grief brings stress. I got ahead of myself there. Okay? So grief plus loss, loss equals grief, grief equals stress. Okay? So to help us understand that, we need to understand the grieving process. How many of you ever heard of Dr. Kubler-Ross? And how many of you have heard the 5 stages of grief? Okay, he's the guy that developed the 5 stages of grief here. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Anybody know what those are in order? What's the first one? No. Okay, there's denial. Define that.
Can't be.
Yeah, you're denying that what has happened has happened. This can't be, or this can't be happening to me. You know, especially if it's an unexpected death or an unexpected loss, you know, it just kind of blindsides you. That's the first stage. You're just in denial. You know, this can't be happening. What follows that? Anger is next. Okay? Typically, where is a lot of that anger directed? Yeah, a lot of that anger is directed at God. And it's funny, not funny, it's kind of sad to me that people who really have no belief in God or no strong belief in God, when they start going through these 5 stages, they blame God. Then they'll acknowledge Him, and they want to blame Him for not stopping whatever the loss was. Where else can that anger be directed?
The person that died or whatever the loss is.
Okay, if you're talking about death, sometimes you get angry at the person that died. Why did they do this to the survivors?
How
right?
could they leave me
How
alone?
could they? Yeah. Where else can that anger be directed? Self. Yeah, we get angry at ourselves because a lot of times we blame ourselves, don't we? For whatever it is that happened. We made a bad decision, or we didn't do enough, or whatever it is. So we go through that anger process. All right, what's next? Bargaining. How does that manifest? Okay, trying to make a deal with God or whoever to get them back. What else? This is maybe a little more difficult. Bargaining includes the dwelling on the past, reliving mistakes. If only I had done this, if only I had done that. And it doesn't really seem like bargaining, but you're replaying that episode or whatever happened in your mind, and you're beating yourself up, but it's moved beyond the anger itself to, it's the second guessing basically. I should have done this, I shouldn't have done this, whatever.
It's more if you're angry at the person or if you're angry at God, you begin, it becomes more internal and more pointed toward yourself. When you get into that bargaining, if only I had done this when I was raising my child type thing. Because if you've had children that have gone astray, you go through grief, and that's, I spend a lot of time in that bargaining phase right there.
Or if you've, and I think Kelly may have brought this up, if you've lost a relationship, if whether it's divorce or whatever, this is a big stage for people who are experiencing that kind of loss.
Is that part of rationalizing?
I would think so.
Yeah, I think there's some rationalizing. Because it's you have the like Randy said a while ago, you have the if only kinds of thought. If only this, if only that, and that's a form, I think, of rationalizing. Yeah. Even if you had absolutely no control over the situation, you still try to rationalize it.
Try to ease pain.
Yes.
Yep. And again, these are the stages of grief. This is how we grieve these losses. It's what we go through to try to deal with it. So anybody know the fourth stage? No, that's the next one. That's after. Fourth one is depression. Okay? That's when it's all kind of hit home and you experience the sadness, the loss of energy, the feeling of hopelessness, like, nothing's ever going to get better. Nothing's ever going to, be different than it is right now in this state. So that's stage 4. And then stage 5, as Becky said, that's finally the acceptance. That's the submission to the new reality. And I like that phrase right there. Okay? You're able to deal with the change. A lot of times people talk about after loss getting back to normal. Okay? There's no getting back to the way it used to be. And you've probably heard this phrase here because it's become very popular in the last several years, the new normal. It's not what it was before, but you're learning and you've learned how to cope and accept your situation now, accept this loss. Again, whatever it is, the person is gone, the job is gone, whatever it is that we've lost, now we've come to accept it and deal with our new reality. And then you're able to move on. Again, not get over and not, get back to normal, but you're able to move to a new phase of living.
Again, Mike, in his presentation of this lesson, I'm not sure if it was right here in the lesson, but he had a great example to talk about this acceptance, and that is he said when he was younger he had a big gash in his arm, and it was really serious, and for a long time it hurt, and then finally it began to heal, and then he stopped thinking about it every day, and then finally he basically stopped thinking about it, but the scar was still there. So the pain was gone, but the scar was still there to remind him of what he had gone through, and that's kind of what happens in the acceptance phase. Is you're never going to completely forget. There's still scar there, an emotional scar there, but you've learned to I don't know if you used the phrase, I think you did, live with it. Mm-hmm. And it's like that, like Randy said, the new normal, and you can finally get to a point where you can think about it without there being the pain.
and most of us have experienced these, whether you realize it or not, whether you're able to articulate it in those 5 steps or not. We've experienced, these phases. But when we do, there's going to be stress. Remember, we talked about one of the first lessons. Stress in and of itself is not bad. Okay? We have to endure stress in our lives. That's how God's made it. That's how God's made the world. We have to experience stress. Sometimes stress can be good. It helps us. But in this kind of case, how do we reduce that stress? How do we deal with it so that it doesn't become that overstress that we've been talking about, that crippling stress that keeps us from being able to live our lives? Okay? So there's some things connected with this that we need to realize. Okay? Number one, we are never truly ready for the loss. Okay? Even if it's like a long, drawn-out illness and the eventual outcome is death, or it's a long, drawn-out process of whatever, and you realize at some point, I'm going to lose this. I'm going to lose this job. I'm going to lose this relationship, whatever. You're never truly ready for it, are you? Okay? And I've heard so many people say that. We experienced that with my mom. She fought cancer for several years. And then right there at the end, about a week of her really struggling, and we knew it was coming, but then when it happened, it's like we still weren't ready for that, finality. So it helps us if we will realize that grief is a process and not just a singular event. Right? It's a process that we go through. And again, that's why there are those 5 stages. And sometimes those stages last, longer for other people than they do for others. Or some people will move through a couple of them quickly and then get stuck at one of them. And it's different for every individual. Right? Sometimes grieving can go on for months or years or decades.
He talks about, he says it's not just for the gravesite. Mm-hmm. And I've left more gravesites where I've heard people say to the bereaved, now you can move on. And that's the most ludicrous, ridiculous thing that you can say to a person who's grieving, because grief, and this is what helps us deal with the stress, is knowing that it is a process. You're not going to be healed overnight from the grief.
And I think a lot of times well-intentioned people, well-intentioned friends, whether they realize it or not, pressure us into get to feeling better quickly. They want us to get back to normal, And sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves. We don't like being, going through the stages, the anger and the depression and all that stuff. And so sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to get beyond it. But we need to kind of settle down and realize that it is a process. Now again, for some it may be a quicker process than it is for others. Okay? It all depends on the individual and kind of how you deal with those things.
And the type of loss as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Have any of y'all in here received the booklets that I send out, the Journeying Through Grief? Yeah, several of you. I mean, I really appreciate that title that is in those books. It's a journey, the journeying through grief. And I've had, through the years, had a lot of positive comments from those booklets. For you folks that haven't received one, it's when we have a death in the church family, and it depends on the relationship of the person who died type thing. But if it's a close relative, I'll usually send out these booklets. It's 4 booklets that are in this series, and I'm setting one up for Teresa right now. And the first booklet goes out 3 weeks after the death. Then the second one goes out 3 months after the death. Then 6 months, and then at the 11th month after the death. And one of the things he says in one of those booklets is you don't rush it. Even on the last booklet, he says, don't let anyone rush you or make you feel like you need to be over it at this point in time, because everybody goes through grief at a different rate. So I've always appreciated what those booklets say.
Which is a great segue to the next point, and that is number 2, grief is necessary. Again, a lot of times we think we're being stoic, we're being strong if we don't go through that process. You need to, and I would also say you have to go through that grieving process in order to deal with it in the right way. Okay? You're never going to feel better about whatever loss it is that you've gone through without going through the grieving process. And so grieving, it's not a disease, it's not a sickness, it's not abnormal. It is the body's and the psyche's natural way of dealing with loss. And so we need to make sure we're going through it. I'll just go back real quickly over the 5 stages of grief, because he talks about in here what purpose each one of those serves for us. Denial is like a psychological shock absorber that helps us to withstand the initial pain that comes with that terrible loss. Okay? Again, it's natural. That's where our body goes, okay? Or where our psyche goes. Anger is the natural vent for hurt feelings, confusion at the changes caused by loss. We need to learn to express anger in productive ways. It should be used as a vent that allows us to release strong feelings without creating damage and hurt. Bargaining is our way of reaching out to find a solution to the problems caused by the loss. Depression is the natural reaction to the difficult new reality that loss has brought about. It's the point where we're allowing ourselves to feel the pain. And then finally, acceptance is the final balance we find between the old and new realities in our lives caused by the loss.
I want to say something about, Randy said grief is necessary, or the slide says grief is necessary. Randy said it too. And I can say this now because my stepmom just recently passed away. I wouldn't want her to hear what I'm about to say. But my dad didn't grieve. My dad was born in the 1920s. He was that generation, World War II, Navy, stoic, men don't cry. You older folks know what I'm talking about. And when my mom died, she was 63 years old. It was totally, she died of a blood clot in her lungs, and from an injury she had on her leg. Otherwise, she was very healthy, and I always, at the time, I thought, wow, he's really handling this well. Well, within just a few months after her death, he started doing things, and I won't go into all the details, but he started doing things way out of character. Way out of character. And at the time, my wife, Hallie, and I were like, what is he doing? Why did he do this? And when we looked back later, we understood, or I understood, that this was his way of dealing with grief, and it was not a good way of dealing with grief. And then he married his second wife, my stepmom, who just, like I said, recently passed away. Before a year had passed since my mom died. And I'll just put it this way, they didn't have a real happy marriage, at least from the standpoint of my stepmom, okay? And so you got to deal with grief. And it's not, just because you're a tough man or even a tough woman or a Christian, and what does the Bible say about Christians and grief? I read it at just about every funeral. What does Paul say? Well, he doesn't say grieve not. We don't grieve like others who have no hope. He doesn't say grieve not. He said we don't grieve like others, and that's the key. Yeah. You grieve, but in a different way. And so I'm sorry to
No, go ahead.
interrupt, but
No.
I mean that's just if they're Christians, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yep.
And I think it's such an important point, and I saw what it did to my dad by not grieving, or not grieving
Properly.
in a healthy way. And so it's nothing to be ashamed of, even as a Christian.
Ralph, you had your hand up?
I was just gonna say what he already
Okay.
gave up on people saying. We don't grieve like those who have no
No
hope.
hope.
That's right.
We have something to look forward to
Yep.
when all this is resolved.
Yep. Becky?
When my son died, I remember that I grieved from the time he was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I dealt with denial and all
Yep.
those things. Then when he died, do I start all over again?
Yeah, you kind of do. Yeah.
Because I don't remember that part. I
Mm.
do remember from the time he was diagnosed, I was already all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
You'd already started that grief process.
By the time he died, I was in acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was coming.
Yeah. What would you say the object of the grieving process is? Because I believe there's an object to it. Chris?
I mean, I personally think it brings you ultimately closer to God. From my own experience, I've experienced grief on several different levels, and
Mhm.
always it's a refining process. It's a process for me. It's something that God needed to work on in me by the end of it, and He has His own way of doing that.
Okay. So it's a recovery process, yes. And that's the answer I was looking for, believe it or not. Chris gets the gold star tonight. That's the point. It's like the illustration that Mark used, or that Mike used with you get a wound, and the goal is recovery. Now the scar may still be there, and it may hurt for a while it's recovered, but that's the goal of the grieving process. A lessening of the intensity and frequency of the pain and sorrow that we naturally feel from loss. So, and it takes time. You have to work at it. You have to go through these stages. You need other people to help you. Okay? But eventually, recovery is possible. Again, that doesn't mean that that everything goes back to normal or the way that it used to be. Okay? Just like with that scar, but recovery is possible. All right, then this is the one I'm going to camp out on here. Okay? Number 3, there is not always an answer. The biggest question that people ask in a loss is what? Why? Why? They want to make sense of what has happened. Okay? And that's okay to question as long as you realize there may not be an answer. And I know y'all going to get tired of me if I stay here any length of time, okay? Because I always come back to Job, okay? But I think about Job. And from what we are told in the narrative of Job, we know he asked the questions, right? Why me, Lord? Why? And I'm simplifying it here, but that was Job's question. Why, God? Why me? And what answer did Job get?
Not an answer.
Roy?
Well, God asked him, God was talking to him. And he said, where were you at when I created? Where were you at when I done this? Where were you at when I done that? So he was, let him know why him.
Yeah.
Because he had been there doing all this. So.
But that's the point. God answers Job with questions. Who are you to question me? Can you explain everything, Job? How I did this, how the earth works and everything. And Job's answer was, no, I'm going to shut up now.
He doesn't give him any answers. He just gives him more questions.
Yeah. And that's my point. Job, we have the benefit of knowing why. Because we can read the first couple of chapters of Job and we see why Job was tested the way he was. As far as we know from the narrative, Job never knew why. He never knew Satan went before God and God said, hey, have you considered Job? And Job was like, hey, let me test him and he'll curse you. Okay, go ahead, but don't kill him and all that stuff. Job never knew that. We do. So realize there's not always going to be an answer to that question of why. And not just from God's perspective either, okay? Sometimes there's just not a question. I mean, there's not an answer. Why did those 3 little girls who we have the memorial trees out there for get killed in that wreck? Who knows? Wrong place, wrong time, someone else's bad decision, whatever. Okay? There's just not an answer.
And part of the problem that occurs during this grieving process is a lot of people think that the purpose of grieving is to find out the answers or to get those answers, and that's far from the truth. Because again, we're not always going to get the answers. In fact, most of the time we're not.
Most of the time we're not. Go ahead, Keaton.
I think it boils down to if we knew the answer to everything, where would we stand with God?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Good point.
And Romans 8:28, my favorite verse, all things happen good for those who love the Lord.
Yeah.
We're called according to his purpose, yeah. And again, I think that's the story we see from Job. Job kept his faith. He questioned. He didn't get the answers that he wanted, but he never turned against God, and it all eventually, was for Job's benefit. Now, and again, don't misunderstand the ending of Job. He didn't get his original 10 children back. He didn't get his original wealth back. God blessed him with additional more, okay? He still grieved the loss of those children. He still grieved the loss of those things. He still grieved the pain that he went through, but it worked out for him in the end. He was able to recover like we talked about.
Plus, he got to keep his wife who told him to curse God and
Yeah.
die.
Yeah. Shamika, I saw your hand up.
It's off topic, but I was just thinking about this one is a big one with suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
They want the answers, but
This is a big one with suicide, she said.
Yep. And that's probably one, unless the person leaves a note, and even then sometimes what the note they leave makes no sense to us, who are left behind. And so there's not going to ever be that answer.
Yeah.
So God does not always provide the answer, but he always provides. God will always see us through this loss and this grieving process. I know some of you were wondering, we're going to talk about the Bible tonight. Let's go to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, because this is where this point comes into play. Mark, if you'll read this for us.
Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Just as it is written, for your sake we are being put to death all day long. We were considered as sheep to be slaughtered. But in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord.
Look back at the beginning of verse 35. How does Paul open this section? I mean, we've divided up the section. What question does he ask? Notice the first word. Who? Who will separate us? And then what is his answer there at the end? Nothing. Nothing and no one will ever make God stop loving us. And yet, when we go through these grieving processes, and especially when we get angry at God, that's the thought that a lot of people have. Well, this happened because God doesn't love me. Or if God loved me the way the Bible teaches, this wouldn't have happened, or whatever it is. Okay? This passage right here tells us nothing is ever going to make God stop loving us. That doesn't mean that bad things won't happen. That doesn't mean we won't have to go through loss in this grieving process and all this stuff. It just means that we need to turn to God in those times instead of blaming him. And I'll even say again, and you may disagree with me on this, I think it's okay to ask God why. Just realize you may not get an answer, or you may not get the answer you want. Okay? But it's okay to ask why. He shares a story here, I'll just go real quick, of a young woman who got cancer and died. And he was talking to the father of this young lady. And he said that he didn't understand how people without faith could go through horrible ordeals like this and survive. And so they concluded in their conversation that unbelievers do face terrible tragedies, and they come out this way on the right: resigned, bruised, bitter, frightened, and in permanent denial. And we've already touched on this already, but they do not come through hopeful. My dad used to tell the story. He preached for 30 years, and he used to tell the story about he did a funeral for a small child that had died very unexpectedly. And they literally had to carry the mother out of the cemetery. This mother was not a believer. She was not a Christian. Carry her out of the cemetery at the end because she was just such a basket case, because she had no hope. To her, that was the end. Putting her child in the ground was it. She was distraught. And I'm not saying that Christian parents don't grieve, okay? Because they do. But as we've talked about before, the Christian has hope that there's something after this life on earth. There's hope that that child is now in the arms of Jesus. And one day, as David said when his child died, you know, he's not going to return to me, but I can go to him. You know?
Come on right through there.
There he is. Talk about a grieving child. Oh, there's no hope. And that to me is one of the saddest things, you know, to witness, is someone who does not have that hope. Because it's a terrible thing, you know. Again, I mentioned my mom, and we've experienced death in our family. I think everybody in here has experienced some type of death in your family. You know, I grieved when my mom died, but I didn't grieve as one that has no hope. I believe that one day I will go see her again. Now, whether I recognize her or not, I don't know. I don't want to get into all that. But I believe the Bible when it says that, you know, we're going to be there, and that Jesus is going to, you know, be with us there. In fact, that's what Paul deals with in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. All right? Let's turn there. We're going to read that one. But 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18. And this is what we just talked about a moment ago. He writes, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus." Let me pause right there for a second. Now, I understand that the resurrection of Jesus in his person is what gives us salvation. Right? But you also realize that his resurrection is tied to our resurrection. And that's what Paul's saying right here. If we believe in the resurrection of Jesus, we can believe in our own resurrection. You know, when it's our time. Right? Going on, he says, "For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep." Of course, fallen asleep here means those who have died. Okay? "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall," what? "Always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words." We will always be with the Lord after the resurrection. There will be no more death. There will be no more tears. There will be no more pain. There will be no suffering. There will be no more loss. And we will exist with the Lord forever and ever. And then he finishes it up by saying, comfort one another. Give one another hope. You know, he's writing to Christians in Thessalonica there who were experiencing the death of loved ones. And they didn't quite grasp this yet. That's why he had to write this to them. He's like, look, you don't need to grieve like those who have no hope. Don't let them have to carry you out of the cemetery. Because there is something beyond this. What's that? There is. Absolutely. Absolutely there is. But we have to believe that. We have to believe that. Got anything you want to add?
Go ahead. Say it again.
It's better there than here.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Better in heaven than here.
Infinitely times better.
That's what gives us the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of as a summary, we kind of finished early tonight, didn't we? In summary, we learned that stress is caused by the grieving process that follows loss of any kind, okay? And overstress, which is that bad kind of stress we've talked about, is created when either we're ignorant of the process of grieving and we have no way of understanding or dealing with those natural feelings that come about as a result of loss, okay? We haven't learned to grieve properly, or we remain too long in the process. And that's another thing that we can kind of touch on here. The grieving process is a process, but we eventually have to move to that final stage of acceptance. Go ahead, Prairie.
Even though you go through all the stages and you get to acceptance and you've accepted it, but you still go back to the anger and the bargaining and the depression.
Yes.
So it's like a little
Cycle.
keep going.
Yeah.
Reruns.
And you'll revisit some of those stages, especially, if it's the law, someone has died, birthdays, anniversaries, special dates. Those times are, you may go back to some of those stages. But I would say, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, okay, but I would say hopefully each time it's a little less painful. You're not as angry. You're not as depressed as you were maybe the first time or two or three that you went back to that stage. And that's completely valid. You will go back and revisit those times. But over time and grieving properly, again, I love that illustration about the scar. The wound that wound continues to heal until it's less and less painful each time. Chris?
And I would say, grief ebbs and flows like we're saying here. But it's first of all, we're made in God's image, and God grieved things too. Jesus grieved. That's one thing.
Yep.
But two, it's just a process that I think, too, again, it refines us. It's a part of the natural part of life. It's not something we can avoid. I think it's just a part of being in this world.
Yeah.
You're not going to live in this world without cycles of grief. It's just a part of this time right now. But the good thing is this isn't permanent. So.
Yeah. Good.
One thing I said at Clay's memorial the other day was, even Jesus, when his friend Lazarus died, and he saw the grieving going on around him, he wept, and he wept even though he knew within the next few minutes he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But I think, in my mind, he was grieving. I think Jesus was grieving more for the other people that were there, the sisters and the friends and the other family members, because of death. Death is that last enemy that has to be overcome, and thank God, He's provided a way for us to overcome that enemy through Jesus' resurrection. Yeah.
I know, and you did a series or a sermon on lamenting at one time.
Yeah.
Grief and the necessity of it.
Yeah.
If it's in here and we have a whole book
that's
just
right.
lamenting, there's a purpose for it.
Lamentations.
Yep. I want to go back to what Prairie said a minute ago. We're going to go back through those stages. That's natural. Okay, it's not that you just go through each stage once and then you move on. Okay, the problem in that word right there, it's when we get into one of those stages and we stay stuck there. And I'm going to say this, and please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. We allow ourselves to get stuck there. We don't try to move beyond whatever that stage is, whether it's the anger or the bargaining or the depression. We have to work through those things and allow ourselves to heal. Some people won't let themselves heal.
That stage, whatever stage it is, that stage becomes the new normal.
Yeah.
Instead of the acceptance stage. I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Prairie, is that you revisit those stages, but I also agree with what Randy said. I mean, from experiencing what I went through with my mom when she passed is, each time when I would go through I wouldn't, not so much the anger, but the depression part, I wouldn't be so depressed, and I would remember the happy times, and I would have more of the good memories than the bad, and I would still miss her. I still miss her today, but I would miss her in a different way than I did right after it happened.
And what's the only way that can happen? Accept it, yeah, but it's a short 4-letter word. Well, yeah, but that's not what I'm thinking of. Time. Time's the only thing that helps, the more we go through those stages, the more we deal with it in the correct ways, and it's true. They say time heals all wounds.
I would add another 4-letter word that helps is prayer.
Prayer.
Pray.
Yeah, pray. Yeah.
But sometimes allowing yourself to get over the grief, the depression, and the guilt from being able to heal delays the healing process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You want to say something?
Yeah.
Okay. The world's answer to the grieving process, and again, that 5-step process that has been developed kind of in the world, is to understand it, to go through it, get help with it, go through it in a normal time, and then accept what you can't change. That's the world's answer. Right? And that's the best answer the world has. Jesus' answer doesn't circumvent the natural grieving process. It goes beyond and says, it goes beyond acceptance to that hope that we've already talked about. Yeah, we can accept that loss has happened, but again, especially if it's death, or even if it's not death, even if it's just, I've experienced this loss, but guess what? This loss is not the end. That my life on this earth is not the end. There's something better waiting for me when my time on this earth is over. And so that's where the Christians, the difference comes in for the Christian, is that we go beyond the acceptance phase to the hope phase. So the resurrection is our hope and a promise from God that there is more beyond this. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
One of the difference between a believer and non-believer is that for the believer, death is temporary. And like the mom your dad was talking about, and for her it wasn't temporary. Mm-hmm. And so, but we understand that, like David did when his baby died, he can't come back to me, but I can go to him. So it was a temporary situation, and that changes your outlook.
I'll be honest with you, it tempered my grief when my mom died. That hope did. Because I can remember back in 1995, my grandmother died, and I was very, very close to her, lived with her for a couple of years while I was in college. And we had a very close relationship. In fact, we shared the same birthday. And when she died, I was very grieved. Because at the time, at least, I did not believe that she was saved. And then when my mom died, I know my mom was saved. I'm not trying to preach my mom into heaven, okay? I know she was saved, okay? And I grieved I think I grieved more for my grandmother than I did for my mom, because I've got that hope that I'm going to see her again one day. And I can't really explain it any better than that. I grieved my mom. I miss her, just like Mark said. I miss, sometimes I'll be thinking, I need to ask mom that. I can't ask her that, But I'm not distraught about it because I've got that hope. All right, so next week, part 2, helping those who grieve. Because that's another big part of grief and in dealing with the stress from grief is helping those who grieve. We'll be looking at that next week. Again, any final thoughts, comments, questions? All right. Appreciate your attention and your attendance.